I close the iron door upon you. Hello and welcome back to this damn Flightualistic Crusade. Of course, this is my review of Indicator's absolutely breathtaking, amazing, must-own Blu-ray release of the one of the key films that defined what became the screwball comedy genre. I'm of course talking about 1934's 20th Century, directed by the legendary Howard Hawks, starring the legendary John Barrymore, and the film that really immortalized Carole Lombard as a screen icon by really cementing her image that would go on to just absolutely dominate in the screwball comedy genre. But it is this film that really formalized her screen image, I think. This film, coming out in 1934, shortly after It Happened One Night, sort of formed a 1-2 punch that defined the screwball comedy genre and got the ball rolling in terms of studios starting to crank out the madcap beauty of screwball films. This was based on an original play by Charles MacArthur and Ben Hecht. It definitely has the overlapping, fast-talking dialogue that we think of in a Hawks film, and it does come in a furious flurry. So without this film, you would not really have Bringing Up Baby or His Girl Friday. So there is quite a bit of that energy on display here, but it is really a frenetic, absolutely incredible story in terms of its pacing and energy. And in fact, it's so fast and so frequently hysterical and bitterly funny, I should say, that you're probably not necessarily going to get everything on the first watch. This is going to be one of the classic films that you're going to watch time and time again, just like Bringing Up Baby and His Girl Friday, where it becomes an old and cherished friend, and it really opens up on further repeat viewing. So don't be turned off the first time you see it if it seems like it's moving too fast. But that's just part of the film's charm, and just down to the incredible energy that Hawks could bring with his overlapping dialogue and just seemingly superhuman levels of winding people up in terms of when they really start to let fly, and the fantastic two-hander scenes between Lombard and the legendary John Barrymore. Now, the plot is on the surface quite simple. The Barrymore character is a theatrical legend who is known for making stars and also being extraordinarily self-obsessed, and Lombard's character is a complete non-actress who has aspirations of working on the stage. And after the brilliantly funny opening that gives us the introduction to the whole cast of characters that surround the Barrymore impresario, we transition into the main thrust of the story once the Lombard character becomes a great star and then strikes out on her own after growing tired of the Barrymore character's extreme jealousy and controlling natures. Barrymore's character then goes essentially on the skids and is on the run from his creditors and in debt everywhere, and winds up on the 20th Century Limited, where it just so happens that after the first stop, guess who just happens to get on board and set in motion a whole bunch of crazy schemes to get her to once again sign with her ex-lover to improve his fortunes once more. Because, of course, if he gets her name in lights, then he can just start printing money, essentially. It is basically the whole opening is a setup to get us on the train where we get the main thrust of the story. It is seemingly expanded a bit from the original play, and like most screwball films where it's focusing on a central location, the beginning and ending can essentially be considered plot setup, but sort of not quite bookends, but they have a little bit of that quality to them. So in that sense, it is similar to It Happened One Night, where the main thrust of the story takes place on the night bus to New York, and of course, when they get on and off and things like that. But it's mainly around the central idea of characters meeting on the night bus. While here, it's getting these characters in enclosed spaces once again on the 20th century, and it's this where that sense, like I said before, of really winding people up and then letting them go and letting them just let fly is the magic of this film. This may be John Barrymore's best screen performance. He had an incredible talent for comedy that people just didn't really let him do as much. He was noted as being, perhaps the greatest Shakespearean actor of his time and was the great profile. But he could sure as heck take the mickey out of himself and knew the inherent silliness of what he did for a living. And even in spite of his own personal demons, I really so greatly admire his comedic performances, or the roles he did where he allowed the natural comedy to come through. There's a touch of that in Grand Hotel, which makes him so sympathetic. There's a touch of that even in Dinner at 8, which is actually one of the there's a slight in-joke in the film about actually a number of them about Barrymore himself and some of his performances. So there's a little nod to his part in Dinner at 8 at one point, and he's also great in the underrated film Topaz. But this one, it's just, I don't think there's anybody else in the world who could have played this part in terms of maintaining that level of energy, spouting this incredible amount of dialogue, and playing a character who should be, in every aspect, completely dislikable and just, a complete bastard. But every second of this film, you just adore this crazy guy. You know that the Lombard character is totally justified in breaking away from him, but you can understand also how all of the other interlopers wind up hanging on his every word, even though they get fired every 2 seconds or they throw in the towel every 2 seconds, but they always come back. That's the thing. He has this magnetism, and I think in some ways the character sort of knows it a little bit, but he's so removed himself from reality, he's so wrapped up in himself that nothing else matters really other than himself. And of course the oft repeated line that everyone will quote forever after you see this film of "I close the iron door upon you." The flowery way he spouts some of the dialogue is just he's a fascinating character. You want to spend more time with this guy, even though he is a complete bastard, and you should hate his guts, as the Lombard character is convinced that she does, and pretty much everyone else around him is convinced that they hate him. But again, they still stay there. They still come back, and it is matched by Lombard's performance, which is something that had not quite happened for her yet in a film. This is where she really found her footing. And there's the oft-repeated anecdote about this film where when they started, it wasn't quite gelling, and Hawks talked to Lombard and was like, well, we got to do something. It feels like you're holding back a little bit. What would you do if this really happened in real life? What would you do to a guy who did stuff like this? And she, promptly said, "I'd kick him in the balls." So Hawks just simply says, well, I can't really do a Hawks impression like Peter Bogdanovich could, but he just essentially said, "Why don't you try doing that?" And it was as if that's when the penny drops, and all of a sudden, the Carole Lombard we know from all of her classic films, this is where she really comes to the fore. And so she gets to be a bit emotional. She gets to just scream and yell and throw it right back in Barrymore's face the whole film. And it's those moments you really cherish here, because and then, she takes a swing at him. She tries to get in probably the best moment of this, when Barrymore bursts into her compartment for like the 1,000th time, and she's just not having it. She finally starts to just rear up, and she holds her legs up, and she's about to just like kick the crap out of him. That she literally starts her flailing away with her legs again, and he just they just, again, the sparks fly to such a degree that the battles between the two and the way that they know each other just makes it ridiculous ridiculously entertaining seeing just them scrap like nobody's business is probably the best way to put it. So that's the magical charm of 20th Century. Like the great Screwballs, which it is one of, it is all about the inherent silliness of being a human being in our society and just how completely ludicrous our day-to-day lives really are when you sit down and look at it and you really take a hard look. And this is something that, of course, Ben Hecht could do like none other. And it has his biting, cynical wit combined with the, I guess, mercurial humor of both Howard Hawks and John Barrymore, and it's all of these characters in real life coming together that make 20th Century such a magical film experience. And it's not as often talked about as the more famous Screwball films. It should be. It's right there with It Happened One Night as the film that really jump-started the Screwball genre. But outside of the critical realms and film books about Screwball films and maybe the occasional class that will talk about Screwball comedies in film school or colleges, it doesn't really get it's not as known or talked about as like Bringing Up Baby or His Girl Friday or The Awful Truth. It does have a bit more of it has a greater cynicism to it, which again, you have Ben Hecht and Howard Hawks. So it has some of that cynicism that turns up again in Nothing Sacred, that was written by Ben Hecht as well. And it has some of the same cynicism that's in his original The Front Page, which was the basis for His Girl Friday. But I think also because it's not as widely distributed, particularly over the past few decades, it's not been as available. It was released on DVD by Sony, but that went out of print and was quite tricky to find. So it was a huge announcement that it was getting a 4K restoration and Blu-ray release from Indicator. So now I'll talk about the release itself. So this is the Indicator limited edition, and let's just take a moment. Let's just look at this for a moment. I mean, this is cover art. This is, obviously original artwork from the time period that Columbia released as one of the poster images. But, I mean, to say that Indicator does the best job of anyone in terms of their packaging and their booklets, yes, I say that all the time. I sound like a broken record, but, I mean, my God, look at that. That is how you sell a film, even though it admittedly does make the film look like a more like a fairy tale romance or something. If you don't know the film, this is the absolutely beautiful gown that Lombard wears when her character has her overnight sensation effect on Broadway. But, I mean, it is just absolutely beautiful artwork. It's in the traditional Indicator style. Again, this is the limited edition, which is limited to 3,000 copies. It is still available on their website. You also get the breathtaking cover art as the disc label. And as if that wasn't enough, Indicator has done one of their typical reversible sleeves with beautiful original artwork. So this has one of the film's other main posters. But still, as always, they do beautiful jobs with these. And the blurb on the reversible sleeve is a quote from Barrymore, which talks about just how important this film was to everyone involved, but particularly for Barrymore. And the quote reads, "I've never done anything I like as well as this role. It's immense, a role that comes once in an actor's lifetime." That's an understatement. And again, for the man who is regarded as the greatest dramatic actor at the time, I do think this is quite possibly his best performance. His penchant for comedy was just unparalleled, and nobody in the world could have played this role in the exact same way, just as with Carole Lombard, but since the film is primarily dealing with Barrymore for 90% of 99% of the film, everything revolves around his character. If it had been somebody not as committed to the part, it just would not have worked. But once again, Indicator has created one of their best in the industry. I mean, I say that every time, but until you get one of these and you read one of their again, they call them booklets, but I mean, look at that. So, as usual, perfect usage of stills, beautifully printed and loaded with a fantastic essay about the film. And in the best touch, as Indicator always likes to do, we have vintage materials. So this is an interview that Howard Hawks did with the great Joseph McBride, and where he actually talks about 20th century in particular. And as usual, Indicator tries to get some sort of vintage materials, words directly from the people's mouths, a first-hand account, or at least something connected with the film directly, in addition to a wonderful new essay and, of course, lovingly reproduced original stills. And then we get the about the presentation credit, which reads that the source of this Indicator edition is Sony's 4K restoration. The film's original mono soundtrack was remastered at the same time. Then the additional Super 8 cut-down version of the film was scanned in 2K, and then also the Austin Film Society trailer was created in 2016. And it also mentions the created subtitles for this release. This is their spine number 208, and as always, no one does books like this in their releases to this level of quality. So this is the main draw of why their limited editions are so amazing. And of course, once the limited version sells out, the standard edition will have the same cover art with a slightly updated logo, but lose the incredible booklet. So that's why it's really great to get their limited editions when they're around. But they're always thinking about their consumers, so it's not like they go out of print once the limited versions sell out. They actually keep their discs in print, but obviously to streamline costs and things. So that's why it's great to get the limited editions when they're around, because Indicator does the best printed materials in the business. They just do. No one comes close to this level of quality in their printed materials and their packaging design. So this is another reason why they are my favorite label in the world. Now to talk about the substantial extra features package, which Indicator is renowned for. So we have the film in its Sony 4K restoration. We have the original mono audio as lossless PCM. Then there's a audio commentary, brand new for this release, with Farron Smith-Neme. It's a very wonderful listen. She goes through great biographical information on the respective talents involved, her own history with the film, where it places in the filmography of Howard Hawks and Carole Lombard and John Barrymore. It's a great track with a good conversational tone, which is how you make any commentary worth a listen, because you could have all the facts in the world, but if it's not pleasant to listen to, then it's going to be a hard sell. So that was great that we finally got a wonderful critical commentary on the film. We also get a brand new featurette where Lucy Bolton talks about Carole Lombard and her career, particularly focusing on the importance of 20th century. That piece is entitled Stars in Her Eyes and runs about 17 minutes. Then we get the classic 1980s Peter Bogdanovich Recommends video on 20th century. This was originally done for, I guess, some sort of cable airing or broadcast television station in the late 80s. They got Peter Bogdanovich to record custom intros, sort of TCM style before that was a thing, for classic films, and why he thought they were important. And of course he can draw on his intensive knowledge of the personalities involved, because of course he was not only a great Hawks admirer but a good friend of Hawks. So it's a little 5-minute piece on 20th century, but a little treasure. If you like this, he actually a number of years ago, before his recent untimely passing, he actually uploaded these to YouTube. So you can actually literally find Peter Bogdanovich's YouTube channel, where it's about, I think it's about 20 or 30 different ones, but they're wonderful little treasures. And even though you may know the information, he's already saying it was his presentation style and doing this when it wasn't something common for people to do. So that's a really nice inclusion. Then, as I mentioned, we get a new transfer of the Super 8 home cut-down version of the film, the digest version, which Columbia did a lot of, just like Universal. So this is a very abridged version of the film. Usually these were silent, so they'd have to come up with subtitles to explain the story that was going on. And it's really fascinating to see how they get films cut down to 10 to 20 minute digest length, and especially silent, for running 8mm at home to at least have some form of reliving the film you liked. But also for a film as frenetically paced and as dialogue heavy as 20th Century, it's fascinating to see the Super 8 digest version. So, it's not exactly essential to have. I know some people aren't fans of including these on releases, but I think it's fascinating. And especially when you do a new 2K transfer of this and you include it on the disc as a supplemental feature, it's a fantastic addition, because you get to see the early forms of what would constitute home video and how you used to be forced to at least have some glimpse of a film outside of the rare time it might be shown somewhere in a repertory theater or a television print airing, which of course could be cut or trimmed for commercials. So seeing the first version of home video essentially is fascinating, and seeing how it was done at the time in a new 2K scan. Then we also get the aforementioned Austin Film Society trailer, which is a nice little modern trailer, which is perfect for repertory theaters showing the film. It's a nicely cut little trailer that very much promotes the 4K restoration that Sony had just completed. So that's a nice inclusion. Then we get a very extensive image gallery, which Indicator does when there are stills available. All of them are extremely high quality, and they're laid out in a wonderful fashion for you to step through with your remote. And if anybody does an image gallery, Indicator does it better than anybody. They make sure all of the images are of high quality, and they follow a sort of pattern for you to go through after watching the film. And then they usually conclude, as does this, with original poster and print materials and lobby cards, so you can actually see where the cover is drawn from. They also specify that the subtitles are new and improved, so that way those who are deaf or hard of hearing know what releases have brand new subtitles that are actually done by hand by somebody paying attention and not just auto-generated, because a lot of releases now don't actually include subtitles, which is a major factor for those who are deaf or hard of hearing in terms of trying to determine what releases to pick up. So that's always a mark of quality and distinction when it is actually spelled out on the actual box that they're included and that they are new and improved. Then we also talk about the limited edition 32-page booklet that I went over with the Pamela Hutchin new essay and the Hawks interview piece. But the most important extra that most people are going to gloss over without realizing how important it is, and the most fascinating one, I think, is the inclusion of the Campbell Playhouse's version of the film story. So the Campbell Playhouse was the later version of the Mercury Theater after the War of the Worlds broadcast, when Campbell's Soup decided to sponsor Wells and his Mercury Theater, and they put on basically the shows they were already doing in the same style, but with a different sponsor. But they do a version of 20th Century. This was done in 1939. It condenses the film down to about an hour, and you have Orson Welles himself playing the Barrymore role. Of course, Welles, like all of us, was a gigantic fan of Barrymore and adored him, as you should. So it's fascinating getting to see not only the film reduced down to about an hour, but it has a completely different opening because, of course, it's radio and you have to condense things down, and you also have to tell everything with voice and sound. It's a really interesting method of condensing the opening down and getting the same beats across and getting the inherent comedy there. But it's most rewarding to hear how Wells himself plays the role, because he doesn't just do a Barrymore impression. He finds his own way of getting across the inherent warmth of the characters. You still like him even though he's doing some pretty darn crummy things, and he plays it differently. It's differently modulated. So that combined with the slight reworking and reduction for radio broadcast, and the fact that it's still the Mercury players who were really doing the most groundbreaking work in radio drama at the time. you can just close your eyes and fully visualize the story. And it is a remarkable adaptation of a ridiculously fast-talking film. So, it's since this film is so dialogue-heavy, the idea of doing it on radio is a brilliant idea. And of course, originally it was designed for the stage, so it's all about the voice. But it's another of the apps. I mean, every Mercury production, whether it was Mercury Theater on the Air or Campbell Playhouse, they're all essential. They're all treasures. They're all iconic radio masterworks. So tacking it on as an extra is not just, oh, this was done on radio, as a Lux Theater episode in the 40s or something. No, this is one of the radio masterworks from the Campbell Playhouse, and it is fascinating to see how they reworked it to fit in an hour, and even more fascinating to see how Wells himself approached the John Barrymore role and found his own way into getting into this character. So it is the most important extra, I think, even though most people are going to go, oh, it's just a radio drama, because unfortunately the importance of radio is not as recognized today like it should be. But to have one of the great Campbell Playhouse episodes, particularly of a comedy, which they didn't do all the time. You think, oh, Mercury Theater, you think the harder stuff, you think Shakespeare, you think War of the Worlds, you think they're Dracula or Heart of Darkness, but they also did lighter material, and their 20th century adaptation is fascinating. So I got distracted by the extras before I talked about the picture and sound. So again, this is from Sony's 4K restoration. The picture transfer is revelatory, as Sony always does with their 4K restorations of classic 1930s crown jewels in the Columbia Library. It is by far and away the best I've ever seen the film. I mean, the last time I saw it was actually on the old DVD, which is hard to track down. So to say this is a lightning leap forward over the old DVD does not even begin to describe. And that did have an HD master like Sony would do, but this is a quantum leap forward in overall quality. It is an absolutely beautiful transfer of Sony's 4K restoration. This is shown occasionally now as a 4K DCP in theaters. It is again, Sony does this with their classic black and white titles. So if you've seen one of their Capra restorations, this you'll know what to expect. But this did not, I don't think, had anywhere near the element problems some of their Capra titles did. But it's another of Sony's breathtaking 4K restorations of a 30s masterpiece. It has lossless mono in terms of PCM mono on the disc. Indicator always goes for a PCM encoding, which is really nice because that means there's no compression whatsoever. And the audio does sound really excellent with natural hiss, and it doesn't seem like it's had that there's not a lot of noise reduction going on or anything. And from what I remember of the DVD, this does sound a little bit better, but seems pretty much like the same source as the DVD. So I don't know if I assume that's the best source that's available they were working from, but it sounds basically just like a slight upgrade over the DVD's audio. So as the disc proclaims, I would like to paraphrase, this film will drive you wonderfully crazy, and it will make you love it forever. That is the 1934 masterpiece, 20th Century, directed by Howard Hawks, starring John Barrymore and the incomparable Carole Lombard, in this absolutely incredible must-own Indicator limited edition based off of Sony's recent 4K restoration of the film. It is one of the essential Indicator titles, which is really saying something. Like most labels, not everything they get to do is a new 4K restoration. The only way you could improve on this, I think, would be to actually have a 4K UHD version, but of course that would require HDR grading, and for a film of this vintage, it's unlikely that you're going to get much of a resolution uptick by going to 4K, but since it's a 4K master, that could happen at some point if Sony wants to do that as perhaps one of their Columbia Classics volumes. But this is a beautiful Indicator release. I think it's one of their essential discs. It is still in print in its limited edition version, and I highly encourage people to pick it up before it is out of print and you're stuck with the standard edition. Although that will still have relatively the same art, but you'll lose the amazing booklet. But this is one of Indicator's best ever releases. It is the best release of this film. Sony's 4K restoration is amazing, as they typically do, and it has a fantastic extras package. And I mean, if this does not sell you on it, just seeing this shot of Carole Lombard, this as the cover, if this doesn't sell you on this film, I don't know what will. But I am so thrilled and pleased that this iconic work of screwball comedy finally has a beautiful, restored, fully loaded edition like it royally deserves. And I hope this will get more people to see the film, talk about the film, and make it a cherished, much loved favorite as it always should be. So that's my review of Indicators, Spine number 208 release of the classic 20th Century. Again, I think one of their absolute must-own titles and one of the best discs of 2021. So, as always, I hope this has been informative and at least somewhat fun listening to me babble on even more about classic films, and of course, showing my deep and unending Indicator fanboying because, again, I think they do the best job in the world in terms of boutique labels and studio labels. Really, their attention to detail is really unmatched across the board. And even though this isn't a box set, it's one of their must-own limited editions. So please get a copy of this. You will not regret it. This is a film that everybody should have in their libraries. It is one of the screwball masterworks that you should return to time and time and time and time. Time again. So as always, keep supporting your studio labels and boutique labels by buying physical media. Keep your disc spinning to help keep physical media alive. And thanks ever so much for watching. Buy it before the iron door is closed upon you.